Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to poker tournament strategy. Now here's your host, Clayton Fletcher.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. I'm your host, Clayton Fletcher, in New York City. I want to start off this episode by wishing everyone a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year. I hope that you had a great Hanukkah. If you celebrate Kwanzaa or Festivus or any other holiday with which I may not even be familiar, whatever it is that you celebrate, I hope that you are able to get together with loved ones and have a great and fun and merry and peaceful and safe, COVID-free holiday to you and yours. Now, with that out of the way, I'd like to read an email that I received. This is actually a Twitter message, and you can tweet me yourself on Twitter at Clayton Comic. This comes from a user named Poker Rock, and kind of made me laugh. Here, I'll read it to you. Hey, Clayton, been listening to TPE podcast for a while now. I'm following from about a year behind during my daily walks. Just wanted to say hi, and also, I thought you were a fat ass like me from the sound of your voice, but your profile pic on Twitter shows that you are one fit bro, so cheers. It's hard to make a comedian laugh, but this made me laugh. I would like to know from all of you that are listening to this now, did the sound of my voice make you think that I was a quote-unquote fat ass? Because I've never heard that before, but it definitely makes me laugh because I can remember listening to other podcasts, including this one many years ago, before I knew what the voices that I was listening to were actually attached to. Certainly someone that's named the Big Dog, I assume was not a tiny, skinny guy. But, you know, this and other podcasts had some sounds of voices on it that I did not have an accurate idea of what the voices owners actually looked like, and when I saw them in person I was a bit surprised. Although Derek Killingbird Tenbush looks exactly like what you think from his voice, so I guess that's good for him. Another Twitter message I received, Tony, his name on Twitter is WanaTRL. Tony says, I'm from Barcelona but living in Sydney. I'm a podcast listener, an ex-member of TPE, because I don't have time much nowadays to play and study tournament strategies, but you are doing a great job. I'm writing to you because you are a defender of winner-take-all in tournaments, and if this were the case, how many players could actually be professional tournament players? As tournaments are a high variance, I believe this prize structure would make tournaments exciting and make players go for it, but at the same time be a very limited ROI, and as a consequence be a recreational activity. Any thoughts? Yeah, I appreciate your thoughtful message, Tony, because it gives me an opportunity to clarify my stance on tournaments. Yeah, I wish that they were all winner take all. I know that if they were, it would be very, very hard to make a living playing them, obviously. But at the same time, very few players actually make their living exclusively from tournaments now. In my perfect world, a lot more players would sit down in the cash games, and that would be fun to have a wider variety of cash games to play. But yes, of course, if I were suddenly anointed president or king of poker and everybody had to do exactly what I want all the time, then yeah, you would probably seek to find tournaments as a professional that you would mostly be trying to play limited tournaments with a cap on how many players could enter or something like that. Of course, this is all fantasy, folks. This is never going to happen in yours, my, or any other lifetime. It's just not realistic that any casino would come up with this structure. And also, I think even if they did, what would ultimately happen is deals would be made, either at the final table or maybe even earlier than that in some instances, because of course players, especially professional players, are always going to seek to reduce their variance. And so, for example, if a very large tournament ended up heads up and the only prize was first place, let's say at $5 million, the two players remaining, once it got down to heads up, would probably make some kind of chop. And you see this even in much smaller events, such as mentioned previously on the podcast here, the sit and goes that they do as satellites for all the various bracelet events during the World Series of Poker. Now, the tournament chips, the lammers that you win, are not supposed to be transferable, but certainly players buy them off of each other constantly, and you can even use them to enter other sit and goes. But many times when you get down to 2 or 3, or I've even seen 4 opponents come up with some sort of chop in those 10-player events. But I don't like the way tournaments are leaning more towards paying a larger percentage of the field and a flatter payout structure. And the reason for that is I don't think it makes watching poker a lot of fun. I mean, some of these structures are so flat. It's like, what do I care if the player I'm rooting for wins $238,000 for second place or $312,000 for first? That's where I think things are going the wrong way. We've got to really start putting more of a premium on winning and emphasizing the value of winning. Even as bracelets themselves become less and less rare, I would like to see a shift back towards the old days when it was very important that you try your best to win the damn thing instead of climbing the ladder. So those are my thoughts on that. I really appreciate these messages and all the message I've gotten on Twitter at Clayton Comic. Now, speaking of going for it, I want to continue our hand history review from the $1,500 Shootout event that I played this past October in the 2021 World Series of Poker. So if you're not caught up on where we're at, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the last 2 episodes where I've been talking through some of the key decisions that I had to make in trying to navigate my way through this event. Now, if you're not familiar with the Shootout format, let me just explain quickly. Unlike a traditional freeze-out tournament or multi-table event where when someone busts out at your table, he is then replaced by another player from a different table, in a Shootout event, you are just trying to win your table. And if you do that, you will necessarily be in the money. And in this particular tournament, that means you're coming back for day 2, already in the money. So we are trying to win our table. There is no prize for second place. So let's talk about where we're at. I'm going to fast forward a little bit to later in the day when there were 4 players left now at my day 1 table, and the average stack was around 62,000. The blinds were 500 and 1,000 with a 1,000 ante, and I was the chip leader with 114K. So my M was 45. I had 114 big blinds, and I was just generally feeling good about my life at this point. The small blind is a tough Russian. He and I are the chip leaders at this table, and so he's in the small blind, and he opens to 2,500, and I am in the big blind holding the Queen of Hearts, Jack of Diamonds. So what to do blind versus blind with this hand in position? Well, if you told me that you want to mix it up sometimes and 3-bet with this hand, I really don't have a problem with that, especially as deep as we both are in this scenario. If we re-raise and get 4-bet, I think we certainly have to fold. And this Russian player is very good. Now, some of the Eastern European foes that you might face will be extremely aggressive and just almost wildly and blindly so, but this player strikes me as a student of the game. He is certainly on the loose aggressive side, but not without logic. He has been very tough, and the only good news that we have is that we're on his left, so we will have position on him throughout the hand. For that reason, I think it's best to call here. our hand is definitely too good to fold. But to me, not quite good enough or bad enough to 3-bet. So I think that calling is the best play here. But if you choose to 3-bet at least some of the time, I don't really mind it. It's just not really how I like to play Queen Jack in position against a tough opponent. So I just call, and we're going to see a flop. And there's now 6,000 in the middle, and the flop comes ace of spades, 10 of spades, 10 of diamonds, hero holding the queen of hearts, jack of diamonds. So we flop a gut shot straight draw, and our opponent leads with a continuation bet for 2,000 into the 6,000 pot. Well, we're getting 4-1 now, and we have a gut shot, and that's not terrible. We also have to consider that we could actually have the better hand here with queen high. Certainly this opponent would be raising from the small blind at a four-handed table with lots of worse hands than queen jack, and flopping ace 10-10. It's very hard for me to have hit this board, so I think a 2,000 continuation bet would probably, from his perspective, get the job done at least some percent of the time. So I think that it's a little bit weak to fold. I don't hate folding here, but I think that calling is slightly better, and that's what we decided to do, especially given that attractive price. I mean, 4-1 is fairly irresistible, at least to me, and I call. And so now with 10,000 in the pot, the turn comes the queen of clubs. So our board is now ace of spades, 10 of spades, 10 of diamonds, queen of clubs, hero holding the queen of hearts, jack of diamonds. So now we made a hand. We have two pair, queens and tens, with a jack kicker. Our opponent bets again, this time 7,800 into the 10K pot. I'm not happy that he bets again, guys. I will be behind when he has an ace or a 10. We also can't beat pocket kings, but I'm not sure our opponent would bet again with pocket kings. We can't beat king jack, but we block that with our jack. This is a tough spot, and our opponent is not making it easy with this sizing, specifically 78% of the pot. I did that math pretty well, 7,800 into 10,000. So I think this is a very, very close decision, and I decided to make the call. Perhaps in a different style of tournament, I might be able to fold. Certainly against a more straightforward opponent, I think it's a fairly easy fold. But given what I know and what I've seen from this player, that he tends to keep applying pressure when he has a range advantage, which I think that he still does on this board even after that queen comes off. So that makes it tough to fold, but it's also tough to call because I'm not exactly getting an attractive price like I was on the flop. So it's close, but we make the call. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that decision, but not until I tell you the river. Now there's 26,600 in the middle, and our river card is the 4 of spades, which completes the flush. So the final board is ace of spades, 10 of spades, 10 of diamonds, queen of clubs, 4 of spades, and now our opponent puts in 25,000, almost a full pot-sized bet. And hero has a tough decision with the queen jack. I mean, this is what tough players do, right? They put you in spots where you're kind of indifferent as to whether you should call or fold. I think this is really, really close. I mean, sometimes you're going to fold and your opponent will win this huge pot with a hand like 7-6, or no pair, no draw, just the absolute gumption to keep firing when he knows he has a range advantage. And other times you're going to call with your queen jack, and he's going to turn over an ace or a hand with a 10 in it, or king jack. So it's not an easy position to be in. I thought about it for quite a while. One of the longest tanks I had throughout the World Series of Poker. And I decided that blind versus blind. Queen Jack was a little too strong to fold. Maybe it isn't, but that's how I felt in the moment. And I made the call, and my opponent mucked. Now, I could have been a jerk and asked the dealer to turn over his hand. You can do that. I never do that. If my opponent doesn't want to turn it over and the dealer's just going to push me the chips, okay, great. I could have said, I called, and when you call, you have the right to see what your opponent was betting with the whole time. But I did not do that. I absolutely never do that, and recommend that you never do that either. Be a gentleman and let your opponent muck his 2 napkins. So that was a great hand for us. It extended our chip lead. I'm still not sure whether I played it right. I think that the standard play would have probably been to fold, especially when the scare card hit, and most of your opponents will not be able to continue firing as a bluff after everything got there. But I don't know, there was just something that told me to call, and once in a while I can be hard to bluff, so it worked out for us this time. But yeah, let me know what you think about that one. That hand has been something I've ruminated on ever since I played it, to be honest. Anyway, things were going swimmingly. We extended our commanding chip lead, and now with 3 players left, the blinds went up to 600, 1200 with a 1200 ante. We had about 175 in the stack at that point, and a open shove from the button short stack for 35,000, and we picked up ace 8 offsuit from the big blind, and that's a pretty easy call there. I don't really see a case for folding ace 8 3-handed, and we turned out to be up against ace 5, which won the pot with a 5 on the flop. So that was unfortunate, because busting that player and going into heads up with 80% of the chips would have been pretty sweet, but instead our short stack doubled up. And after that, he did pretty well for a little while, and he ended up losing to the Russian player, who actually ended up taking the chip lead with that bust out. And I started as a 3-2 underdog chip-wise, and this Russian guy and I went at it for, I'm not kidding, almost 4 hours of heads up. It was one of the longest, maybe the longest heads up battle I've ever had in any situation, including heads up tournaments that I've played in over the years. I haven't played that many, but I've never lasted very long in any of them. This was pretty much epic. At the end of the day, I just ran a little better than he did. I remember one big pot in particular. I had Jack 5 and flopped 3 5s on ace 5 5, and he had ace queen or something silly like that. And so I ended up winning this table and cashing in this event. But you know what? It's never a good sign when your opponent is randomizing his play, and you can tell he's doing so because he keeps looking down at his Apple Watch to determine which of his 2 options he's going to take. I don't want someone that's playing GTO against me heads up, so I really needed to catch lucky, and thankfully the cards cooperated. Of the 9 opponents that started out with me at my table, this was the one I would have chosen to be my least favorite to go heads up against. There were some other good players at my table as well, but generally it was a fairly soft field, as one might expect from a $1,500 buy-in. I was unlucky to have to face this player heads up, especially with him starting with the slight chip lead, but then I was also lucky because at the end of the day, if you run hot in a heads up match, you're going to win that match, and that's what happened to me. So let's take a look at day 2 of this shootout. So I get a whole new table, and we're in the money, and now we have to win this table in order to get to the final table. So this event started with 800 players, and at the end of day 1 there were only 80 players, and at the end of day 2 there will be 8 players. So you can see why I would love the shootout format, because it's all about winning your table. Winner takes all. So the prize for finishing second at your table is the same as your prize for finishing 8th at your table. So pretty cool, I think. Anyway, we started 8-handed. So what they did was 800 became 80, and what they did was 10 tables of 8 players each. And 2 of my opponents were players that I respect so very much. Sam Grafton of the United Kingdom and Joseph Chung, who is, to me, headed for the Hall of Fame. He has a ridiculous record both online and live. He is a fearless and tough player. I've had the misfortune of being seated with him on several occasions in the past, and he has always given me fits. The only good news was that my other 5 opponents were actually relative mortals. So let's talk about how it went. Very early on in day 2, Sam Grafton was very serious about trying to get all the chips. He was playing about 90% of the hands. I think he played literally 9 of the first 10 hands and played them all extremely aggressively. There's no way he was running that good for 9 out of the first 10 hands. He was just trying to establish a chip lead and put pressure on everyone. Or maybe he was interested in playing the other tournament that started that day at 5 o'clock. Whatever it was, he was speeding. And it worked for quite a while, but then he ran into some big hands. And one case where he tried a check raise on the flop, a huge bet on the turn, and a 2x pot bet on the river. And his opponent called him down with 1 pair. Top pair, sure, but still, that's not an easy call to make. It was just, I think at that point, it had become pretty obvious that Sam's strategy was to try to run us all over and win every single hand. So at some point, his luck ran out, and that was that. So he actually ended up finishing in 8th place at our table. And the next player to go out was actually Joseph Chung. And Joseph really impressed me because Sam and another player at our table named Renan Bruschi from Brazil, who is also a pro, although nowhere near as accomplished as those two. Certainly Mr. Bruschi, I might be mispronouncing his name, maybe it's Bruschi, I'm not really sure, I have to brush up on my Portuguese, but Renan is a tough player too. And to me, what separates a good player from a great one is the ability to change gears. That's obvious. Renan is fearless and aggressive and able to continuously apply pressure to all of his opponents. But what's different between him and Joseph Chung is Joseph was actually really, really tight at this table. He was in a rough spot where he had very aggressive players on his left, myself included, and Sam on my left. So Joseph knew that his normal tricks were not going to work at this table, so he patiently waited for spots. He actually just kind of ran bad, to be fair. So Sam essentially punted, and Joseph basically got unlucky, but Renan just kept firing and putting the pedal to the metal. So that is the dynamic here. And we started the day with, I believe everybody was right around 250,000, which kind of makes sense. You won your first table, you started with 25K, and now you have 10 times that. It makes sense. With 6 players remaining at the table, the blinds were 5,000, 10,000, with a 10,000 big blind ante, and we had around 340,000, which was just about average at this table. Renan is in the hijack, and now he opens to 22K. So let's look at the numbers here. We have 340, so obviously we have 34 big blinds. Our M is right around 14-ish. So, and Renan has us covered, not by much. He's got about 400,000. And the action folds to me in the big blind, holding the ace of spades, 9 of diamonds. All right, so right away we have a decision. I don't think we're going to fold, not against this player with this strong of a hand. So the options become re-raising or calling. Now, you have to win your table to do anything. So if we re-raise here, suppose we put in, I don't know, let's say 66,000, that would be three times the original raise, which is I guess a standard sizing, then we will have put in 66,000 of our 340,000. And how should we respond if Renan decides to 4-bet? I think it's tough because ace-9 is probably right on the cusp between hands that you should fold and hands that you should be willing to go with against a player like this. So because we are right in that gray area, I decided to take the lower variance route and just call. Please note that another advantage to not 3-betting with our ace-9 is that our opponent is unlikely to put us on an ace when one flops, because most of the aces that we have, he might perceive that we would be 3-betting. Certainly, if we could switch seats and I open and Renan looked down at an ace anything, ace X in the big blind, he would be 3-betting. So he might think that that would be my strategy versus his aggressive self as well. And generally it will be, but because my stack was so awkward and because I wouldn't know how to respond to a 4-bet, and because I can expect to get 4-bet quite a bit, I chose to just call. Now, note that I'm not calling to disguise the strength of my hand. I think that playing your hand a certain way to disguise it is generally a mistake, but if my hand strength happens to be disguised by the play I made for other reasons, that's never a bad thing. So let's see a flop. There's 60,000 in the middle, and the flop comes the 10 of diamonds, 8 of diamonds, 8 of spades, hero holding the ace of spades, 9 of diamonds, and the action, of course, is on hero. So we don't have a pair, but we got a lot going on here. What should we do? Well, I decided to check and go for a check raise on this board. I'm expecting Renan to have too many c-bets in his range, and I'm expecting a lot of good things to happen when I check raise. Number one, I could just win the pot, which is always great. I mean, I can represent an 8. He could, of course, have a 10 or an 8 himself, but most of the time he's going to have nothing on this flop. As long as he calls and doesn't 3-bet, we have the opportunity to pick up a lot of good cards on the turn. Now, of course, we can make a pair with any ace or any 9, but also another diamond would give us a flush draw because we are holding the 9 of diamonds, and that's a pretty decent flush draw in a heads-up situation. Certainly a queen, jack, 7, 6, so many cards that would give us a straight draw, and the plan is going to be to continue barreling on any one of those cards just because Renan is playing such a wide range, and even if he calls this check raise, he might not be able to continue. So that was the plan, but of course the best laid plans of mice and men occasionally do get foiled, and mine does here as Renan decides to check behind. So the problem with having a plan to check raise is you need your opponent to cooperate by making a bet. I can't raise if he doesn't bet, so when he checks, we're just going to see a turn for free, and that turn card is the deuce of diamonds. So our board is now 10 of diamonds, 8 of diamonds, 8 of spades, deuce of diamonds, and hero holding the ace of spades, 9 of diamonds. So action is on Clayton, and you might decide to bet here. Darn it, I didn't get to check raise on the flop, so now I have to bet the turn if I want to bluff. Notice we did pick up that flush draw with the diamond here on the turn. I still went for a check here. This opponent is so aggressive that I'm hoping he'll put a little bet out there that I can raise it and win a bigger pot. I think that betting as a semi-bluff on the turn is also profitable, but I think that checking is probably more profitable because I find it hard to believe that this opponent will be able to resist now that I've checked twice. I think he's going to bet about 100% of his range, and a lot of that range won't be able to sustain a check raise from me. So I check, And sure enough, Ren Brewski puts out 18,000 into the 60,000 pot, so less than 1/3. And so, of course, I pounce. I make it 48,000, so it costs him another 30, and gives me a pretty good price to win the pot. Even if this check raise works once in a while, it's profitable, and that doesn't even account for the fact that I will sometimes make a flush to win the pot on the river, or possibly even a pair of aces. So I have plenty of outs the overwhelming majority of the time. So we make it 48, and Renan calls. So we have to try to put him on a range here. What kind of hand would check behind on the flop, bet small on the turn, and then just call the check raise? Well, I think it's fair to say that he does not typically have an 8 for 3 of a kind or better. I just don't think that he would just call our check raise with a very strong hand. I also don't think that he would have bet so small on 4th Street in the first place if he had slow played a big hand on the flop. So for all those reasons, I am putting him on a mediocre hand that's not quite ready to give up yet. Maybe something like, maybe a 10, possibly a 10, but more likely a pair like pocket sevens, maybe like King Jack with a diamond that now picked up a flush draw, but still isn't quite sure where it stands, so it doesn't want to play too fast. So all of those hands are possible, but the way things have shaken out here caused me to believe that our opponent wasn't especially strong. So we're going to a river, and now with 158,000 in the middle, and by the way, we still have 280 behind, so plenty of chips to work with here, guys. The river comes the Jack of Spades for a final board of 10, 8, 8, deuce, Jack. And we have a decision to make. We have check the flop, check raise the turn and gotten called. Is this a give up spot, or is this a place where we need to fire another barrel into this pot? I don't know, guys. What do you want to do? Well, you know me. I'm not going to just let this go. I only have ace high, and I don't think it's going to be good very often. So I'm going to bet. But let's talk about why. Let's talk about blockers. Okay, my 9 of diamonds blocks all flushes and straights. 9, 7, and queen 9 are the possible straights on this board, and that means it's much less likely that I'm up against a straight, and the fact that I have a diamond makes it harder for my opponent to have a flush. Also, and maybe a little bit less obviously, I'm happy that of the 2 cards I have, I'm glad that the ace is not the diamond, because our opponent will often have the ace of diamonds in his hand. I don't want to have the ace of diamonds in my hands, because if I'm going to bluff now, some of the hands I'll be bluffing are hands that called the check raise on the turn because they had the nut flush draw, which would mean they now have ace high. So I decide to bet, and I went pretty large here with the sizing. Again, I think that a lot of our opponent's range is going to be hands like pocket sevens, something in that area. So we need to bet pretty big to get those hands to fold. We can't make it a trivially easy call for those hands. So I went ahead and put in 98,000 of my remaining 280,000 into the 158,000 pot. And now Ren Brewski starts tanking. And I'm hoping he folds. I'm wanting him to fold. In my mind, I'm willing him to fold. But with my body language, I just try to look neutral. Just try not to give anything away as this Brazilian is staring me in the face and trying to look into my soul. So I'm just trying to be as calm as I can. I don't feel like I give away too much at the table, but who knows, because somehow, some way, Ren Brewski called my 98,000 bet on the river with just the 5 of spades and 5 of clubs. To be fair, I can't believe he called the check raise on the turn with that hand, but I guess if he did, he needs to call again at least some of the time on the end. So that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. I ended up finishing third at this table, which doesn't really make much difference. As mentioned, you have to win your table to get anywhere in a shootout, and I came up a little bit short. Who knows what would have happened if, like almost everybody else I can think of, Ren Brewski folds his pocket fives in this situation. Then I would have had a nice stack and possibly been in position to make the necessary moves to possibly make my first ever World Series of Poker final table. But it wasn't meant to be. With this hand, I became a short stack at my table, and I survived for a while, but I never really got back above average and ended up going out in third place. I got 37th overall. For what it's worth. You basically get the min cash unless you make the final table. But yeah, that min cash was for something like $5,400, and I got a lot of valuable experience against some very good opponents, and all in all, it was one of the highlights of what was mostly a lackluster, quote-unquote, summer. Well, that'll do it for this episode, guys. If you're still not a member of Tournament Poker Edge, what are you waiting for? Join up now. Use the promo code at checkout. That promo code is podcast, and you will save $10 off of your first month's membership at TPE. So, for everyone here at Tournament Poker Edge, I'm Clayton Fletcher. Thank you so much for listening, and happy holidays.
I wanna hold them like they do in Texas, please. Fold them, let them hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Lock in intuition, play the cards with babes to start. And after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. I wanna roll with her, a hard pair we will be. While little gambling is fun when you're with me. I love it. Russian roulette is not the same without a gun. And baby, when it's love, it's not rough, it isn't fun. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. Can't read mine, no she can't read about poker face. She's got to love nobody. Can't read mine, no she can't read about poker face. She's got to love nobody.